I hope you're ready to bounce because we're going to hit some expansion joints in the new facelifted Buick Envision. This is a surprisingly exciting new vehicle for me, but it is a General Motors crossover, and off to the bouncy castles we go. Today is an exciting day for me because I actually get to give a General Motors product a more or less positive review. This isn't something that's happened all that frequently in the past, but this newly facelifted 24 Buick Envision really actually starts to pack in the value and is a surprisingly pleasant way about. The Envision is Buick's mid-sized two-row crossover. Slotting in above the Envista and the Encore GX, Buick touts the Envision as its most standard technologically equipped model yet. Packing in a surprising amount of tech right from standard, we've actually got a lot of ground to cover. The Envision joins in with Buick's current three-tiered trim model. This here is the ST, the Sport Touring, falling in between the Preferred and top-line Avenir trims. This thing prices from 47 Canadian. That base model comes in from just under 45, and you're looking at just shy of 53K after delivery for that top Avenir trim. Even just from standard Preferred though, you're getting quite a bit here. Straight away, your eyes will probably be catching that newly introduced 30-inch display across the dash. This is a really nice upgrade and seems to be what was probably planned all along. I remember complaining in Buick reviews for the last 2 years that their big swooping bezels seemed like they really should have been treated to full bezel complex screens, and whether that was because of chip shortage or what have you, they have finally upgraded to make the ultimate use of that. In execution, it's really nice. Not only are they nice displays, but there is a very premium feeling in a full-edged, particularly round-edged display like we have here. Nice too is the fact that it's not just touchscreen on that right center section. No, Buick has actually extended the touch zone into the far left here too, where we control HUD and some other settings depending on context. At the heart of your display, your choice of a more or less standard cluster display or a map if you want that. You also, of course, can have your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto connected wirelessly and projected on the right. That's important news because that does seem to suggest that maybe Buick is finally softening on that whole customers don't want their CarPlay and Android Auto thing, even though customers absolutely want their CarPlay and Android Auto. With that being said, the native setup is pretty slick. It's a continuation of that Android Automotive OS system that we've seen introduced over the last few years, and it integrates nicely into the core cluster there too. A nice detail too is the media display that we get here just to the right of the Speedo. But of course, a display is not a whole exciting standard feature set, so what am I referring to there? Well, for starters, standard 360 camera views. This makes this thing really easy to park. We've also got standard blind spot monitors out there in the mirrors. We've got a heads-up display right in front of the driver. Standard in this $47,000 car. Base models get 18-inch wheels, while the ST and Avenir get 20s. We're also talking power liftgate, active noise cancellation, and quite notably, an upgraded 9-speaker Bose audio system. This is not necessarily the most powerful system, but what's more impressive than just outright wattage here is actually the depth and range to it. This has been a really pleasant system to use and explore over my 12 or 1,500 odd kilometers in this car this week. I just took it down to Detroit to visit General Motors Technical Center for something else you will soon find on Driving.ca, and all throughout I was really quite impressed. Throw on something like Poison Arrow by ABC, and the little breakouts with the really high, really concentrated bits of travel really stand out here. The tweeters in the front corners just below the windscreen give a surprising spatial sense to the audio and a lot of clarity in those highs as well. It's an unusually clear and strong setup in that dimension, and I've got to say I am properly impressed by it. It keeps on going too. We've got heated rear seats. We've got acoustic laminated dual pane front glass. Go up into that Avenir trim, and we also get upgraded adaptive dampers. Now, those are quite welcome because I wasn't joking when I was talking about the bouncy bounce early on. You see, General Motors gas-powered crossovers just have this thing. For some reason, they always seem to be light on damping force. If you're unfamiliar, damping is basically a gas strut that holds the spring back from just straight winging when you go over a bump. It makes things steady out so that you don't get that super intense uppity, downity, bouncy castle. This is something I've complained about in the GMC Terrain and in the other Buicks as well. It isn't the end of the world, but it just feels uncontrolled and a little crude. It's surprising too that it feels as crude as it does, because this is otherwise a very modern feeling drive. You've got 5-link multi-link suspension all around. It's an independently sprung vehicle, and it feels really good in most cases. Feeling good as well is the 2-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine. It puts out 228 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Cruising Ontario's highways both south to the border and now up into northern Ontario, it's plenty of power, and combined with the updated suite of driving assists, makes for quite an easy drive. We've got adaptive cruise control, which, among other things, is doing a better, I would say now, than previous year's job of accounting for cars transiting in and out of lanes. If the car recognizes that someone is leaving the lane, and it makes sense for it to narrow that gap a little bit, it will actually follow through in a logical way. Lane keeping does the job reasonably well, though it's worth noting that GM did unfortunately choose not to make its Super Cruise setup an option in any of these Envision models. One likely reason for this? Well, Buick's been a really big brand in China of late, and that is where this car is built. And I've got to say, they've done a really good job of it. With that being said, Super Cruise is a setup that is mapped for North American highways, and that is not exactly that same market. There are, of course, presumably other reasons for that too, chief among which may well be that this is a surprisingly aggressively tech-packed value product, and to wire it to be able to accommodate or simply to fit from standard the Super Cruise sensor and everything kit would add a good bit to that. But value product as it is, it doesn't feel bad. They've gone somewhat heavy on the piano blacks here to try to impart a premium feel. They look really good when it's clean, and they start to look really cheap once there are fingerprints and other road trip scuzzs on them. There are other nice materials though here. We've got some very nice textured plastics, and I've got to say the vinyls in this vehicle are actually starting to feel a little bit like the satin touch vinyls that you'll get in a lot of the Land Rover products now too. There's no leather available here in the Envision, but GM has made, I think, respectable use of what they've got. That being said, some of those buttons and controls still feel a little bit meh. The hard buttons down here for climate control are great, and they're really welcome, but the steering wheel controls are and more importantly, they aren't exactly the most intuitive. Indeed, they're actually really rather frustrating. GM has switched this now to Stellantis style rear of the wheel controls for media. So we've got our track up and down and our volume up and down on the left and right respectively. On the face of the wheel, we've got a whole jumble of buttons that aren't necessarily intuitive even as you've started to get a feel for the car. Cruise control buttons are a bit of a reach even with my larger hands, and the opposite corresponding control on the right side, which looks like it would probably control track forward and back, is hard mapped to select your favorite radio stations, whether you use radio or not. Another why? Well, down here on the bottom left of the steering wheel, on the face of the steering wheel, again, where, remember, we generally keep the most important, most accessed controls on the go. We have this M button. That changes this 9-speed automatic into manual mode, where you can use these paddle shifters to shift up and down for sporty driving in your Buick crossover. Who is going to use this? Bear in mind too that you can always just hit the paddle and it'll override it anyway. This is silly. We could use this space for other things, like perhaps the lane keeping, which for some reason is kept off of the steering wheel, even though that would be a really logical button to keep grouped in with the rest of the cruise control and associated buttons. I don't know, what do I know? Other bits of note, well, we've got standard wireless charging down here at the front of the console. We've got a volume knob down here in the center, although we don't actually have track controls next to it. And if you aren't right in that pane on the infotainment, you do actually lose the ability to immediately change your song, even though you have that display right there in the cluster a lot of the time. What else have we got? Well, we've got an automatic dimming rear view mirror. We've got reasonably pleasant seating, although I've got to say that rear row doesn't actually afford the most leg room. I'm 5'8", and sitting behind myself isn't actually ideal in here, which is unfortunate. Boot space is quite good though, and long enough to fit a shotgun in diagonally, so that's good to know for 3 of you. And as you can hopefully hear, the noise cancellation does actually do quite a good job. Wind noise off the mirrors, road noise from down below, they are certainly present, especially now that I've got the radio off and I'm just talking to you in silence, but they aren't too offensive. If you're driving in the city a lot, you may notice that these A-pillars are a bit of an intrusion into your forward visibility. That isn't ideal. Also, kind of poor is your rear quarter visibility. You're gonna be really depending on that 360 camera view when you're maneuvering backwards. Fortunately, we've got rear cross traffic with emergency braking, and this thing will also beep at you when you've got cyclists approaching from either side. That's really, really welcome, and does actually line up with GM's claims about their push for not only driver, but also pedestrian safety. So, where does this fit? Well, this is definitely a notable step up from the Envista. Knowing that that front drive only configuration will turn some consumers away, this, though more money, is standard with all-wheel drive, with your option of knocking it back down to 2-wheel if you're concerned about fuel economy. For people like me who head up into Northern Ontario, that is welcome, although it's worth noting that, well, yes, all-wheel drive is great, there is a lot of marketing that went into that, and front-wheel drive with proper current snow tires will get you a lot farther than you probably realize. On quality, I've really got to say that this is starting to feel a lot better than the GM we've seen in years past. It still has its shortcomings, and were it not for all of these soft touch materials that really draw your attention and impart a premium feeling, that opinion may not come quite so readily. But as appointed here, it makes a strong impression. Good job then, GM, and well done, General Motors China. For Driving.ca, I'm Al Alder. For more premium car news, reviews, tests, previews, specs, and all the rest, be sure to follow us online on Driving.ca and check out our socials.